Hi, everybody. So, I actually wrote my paper on working with adult survivors of sexual assault, but I feel like I sort of covered that already in my last video. I wanted to give you all a sort of just really basic, quick overview of child sexual abuse, the rape laws, and child pornography laws in New York State because I think it's just helpful to have this sort of frame of reference as we go forward and as we deal with as we're treating folks that have been abused and also folks that are sort of have committed abuse. I think that it's a little bit dry for sure, but it's for me and my work, it's been invaluable to have this sort of background. So I wanted to share. One thing that I always hear in people that are saying that we have too strict of sort of sexual assault laws or that, we're in this sort of Puritan state is that, well, if an 18-year-old is sleeping with a 16-year-old, then that's statutory rape. And that, that poor couple, that guy's going to go to jail or that girl's going to go to jail. Not the case. The sort of least for rape in the third degree, it's a differential of, when the victim is less than 17 years old and the perpetrator is more than 21. And then we have second degree where the perpetrator is more than 18, the victim's less than 15. So we're looking at like a 19 and a 14-year-old, which makes sense to me. And then for the first degree, the most severe, we have less than 11 years old. The victim it's always considered rape in the first degree, and then the victim's less than 13, and the perpetrator is more than 18. So again, I just think that it's good for us to know that. So when somebody comes to you and says, well, that these poor teenagers, it's not happening. It's not getting prosecuted in New York that way. And sexual assault is a really huge problem for children. This is nationally 1 in 9 girls, 1 in 53 boys. And it's estimated that a very small amount of cases are actually reported to the authorities. So again, just a little frame of reference, this does happen. I'm happy to sort of talk to anybody about, the various other statistics around this. I'm pressed for time today, so I will sort of keep it brief and to the point. Trauma aspect, again, fairly intuitive, but the difficulties of child sexual assault can follow victims and survivors well into adulthood. And that was really what I focused my paper on, was working with folks that have grown up and are trying to sort of heal from that trauma. But again, PTSD, depression, suicidal ideation, suicidal attempts, and then substance abuse. So these are really significant traumas that can occur for folks that are sexually abused as children. This slide, for me, I would say this is the PAR slide, because I have a very visceral knee-jerk reaction, as I'm sure many folks do, to the idea of sexual contact between an adult and a child, or an adult having sexual desires or fantasies about a child. And I love this piece by David Finkelhor because he basically says, and he's a seminal researcher on this topic, and he basically says, we as a profession, as professionals, as clinicians, we cannot simply just say, well, it's wrong, it's unnatural just because that argument doesn't, hold a lot of water in a scientific sense. So he kind of goes into like, well, let's break down these real sort of frameworks for why sexual contact, anything between an adult and a child is wrong and unethical, right? So I think that, children are not asexual beings. They have a sense of sexuality, but in the context of what an adult's perception of sexuality and sexual relationships, children are completely ignorant. They're not aware of the social meanings of these relationships, or they're not really able to sort of have a criteria for selecting a sexual partner, and they're not aware of, power dynamics in these relationships. Secondly, another great point that I think is always super useful, legally, children don't have free will. They can't. They are like the prisoner in the experiment, who consents to the experiment, right? We all had that example. They legally have no free will. Their free will belongs to their parent or their guardian, and they rely on adults, in there that are caring for them for things like survival, food, shelter. And another just sort of analogy is it's like a therapist having sex with a patient. Obviously, it's can be a lot worse than that. But again, I think that's a helpful framing device. So therefore, pedophilia can never be considered a sexual orientation, right? Because it's abuse. It's always abuse. Um, and then finally, just child pornography laws in New York State. I think we hear a lot about like this sort of idea that like a picture of a naked child is child pornography, or when I was doing teenage revenge porn advocacy, we would try to, there was a lot of this talk of like if a 14-year-old girl takes a picture of herself topless, that's child pornography. It's actually not legally child pornography. So like there's no lobby to make images of naked children like as child pornography in New York State. It has to be sexual performance or lewd exhibition, which includes sexual action by the child. I've just heard a lot recently about folks kind of saying that, just these images by themselves are illegal and we need to be careful of that. It's not child pornography. I mean, it's like it can be really harmful. Those images of children can fall into the hands of pedophiles for sure. But legally right now, there's no call to make them illegal, and there's, that's not happening. So I just think that's helpful to know for us as we move forward. And then I have a link, and I can include this in my post, to thorn.org, which is just a really, really good nonprofit that's committed to really fighting internet-based sex crimes and internet-based abuse. And you can sort of read about the trauma and for most cases, child pornography survivors, knowing that image is out there, knowing that it's being looked at for sexual pleasure by adults, it's like they're getting abused over and over again. And I do think that sort of serialized trauma piece of child pornography differentiates it from child sexual abuse. And it's just, a sort of important thing for us as social workers to know. I'm well over time. I apologize. Thank you for staying with me. And I would be happy to speak with anybody, in more detail about the topics I've mentioned today. And I hope that you can sort of take these legal pieces that I've laid out for you, and that they'll perhaps be helpful to you in practice or in an argument. Thank you.